Editorials. The philosophy of the absolute. There are two kinds of people in the world: people with a vision and people without a vision. Those people with a vision who claim to have surrounded the absolute are those without a vision. So first of all, let us take up an argument in defense of the absolute. If any human creature knows all there is to know, the absolute is not very wise, because the more we hear about him from his disciples among men, the more foolish traits, the more idiosyncrasies, and more lopsidedness we find attributed to him. The man who says, "I know all there is to know," is making either a fool out of God or an egotist out of himself. We have a large group of people who are personal friends of the infinite, have been properly introduced to the unknowable, and spend their weekends, heads in conflab with the definitionless abstract. There are several types of people who know this absolute. Some of them are inclusive and some of them are exclusive. We have a certain amount of patience for the inclusive absoluter, but the exclusive absoluter excludes the absolute. It is this certain group of people who are not even willing to know what God knows, and have long left such ordinary ignoramuses as the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost far in the rear. They speed by their cosmic logos in their 12-cylinder Rolls Rough with a ta-ta to the universal creation. They glide by 82,000 hierarchies of Devas, Chohans, Mahachohans, and Rishis, without even condescending to consider them. They step from star to star, leaving thin trail of blue smoke behind them from the exhaust of their intercosmic velocipede. Said tailstream is now called the Milky Way. They are headed for the footstool of all there is, dissolved in all that is not. They are the true star rovers, with apologies to Jack London. The gods of their fellow men are pygmies unworthy to notice. They have found that which is not, yet is and ever shall be. Their mind is dissolved into unison with the cosmic void, and they have attuned their body and consciousness to the low-pressure area of the absolute. They no longer worry as to what they shall eat, nor what they shall wear, nor how they shall speak, nor in whatsoever manner they shall perpetuate themselves or propel their personality. Their minds are on the mystic ethers of the divine isness. Naught else will interest them nor fill the aching void between their ears. They are the living contradictors of visible and tangible things. They have made the solidity of nature a vacuum, while they have asphalted the absolute and made of the abstract a solid concrete deity as brainless as they are. Now let us take a careful analysis of the mental caliber of the star rover and find who composes these seers and sages who have left creation to its own destruction and sailed to salvation on the pinions of their mentality. Mostly opinions. We will analyze the stock which flavors of the divine wisdom of ages, like onions flavor soup. Those people who have become tired of terrestrial things and who consider the universe to be the divine failure, and they the successes. One of our leading absoluters who has shaken hands with a non-existing entity and has defined the depth of is not is Mrs. Patricia Murphy, whose husband runs the local barber shop. Mrs. Murphy was born with a vision. She does not know the occipital frontalis muscle from the Latin word for broom handle, but in spite of this, she has the vision. She has not the slightest idea of what God has ever done, but she knows him personally. She has told a number of her friends that she has traced French pastry back to the first outpouring and is quite confident that the Absolute's grey whiskers are made of icing. This is her total idea of the Absolute. She does not know the meaning of any of the episodes that surround her life. She has been careful not to consider them for fear that she might be enveloped in the veil of Maya and lose her personal touch with the abstract. Her idea of the Absolute is a large, round, dark hole, for she has absolutely nothing in her own brain to fill it with. But she admits that there is such a hole, and by doing so, becomes saved. The second member of this celestial trinity we are considering in our little spasm is Gluck McFag, a well-known disciple of things vacuumized. He has come into the light by realizing that there is not any, and by so doing has proved that there is. This is a little problem in celestial mathematics based upon the fact that if you have something, it isn't, while if you lose it, it comes back. Undoubtedly, Pythagoras would have enjoyed this system. In other words, we glorify God by proving that his manifestations are foolishness. We worship him as an individual who spends all his time making mistakes and filling the universe with a series of unnecessary non-entities, that through them we might learn how good he is. Another mathematical problem, with apologies to Euclid. But let us return to this error of the mortal mind, commonly known as Gluck McFag. According to all the lights of the absolute reasoning, Gluck does not exist at all, and not being himself is capable of being blended into the eternal vacuum. Socrates, we believe, attempted to solve the problem in the same way, but finally got so twisted up that he took hemlock so he could have another brain a little later. He lost the brain he had trying to find a round hole in the center of a depthless opening. Gluck is our leading haberdasher and necktie vendor. He sells collar buttons, arch supporters, and imported suspenders with great ease and fluency, and is considered a leading light in the affairs of earth. He is not a very highly educated man. One day a friend came up to him and said, "Gluck, give us your definition of the absolute." Whereupon he opened the front door and threw his chest out with great gusto, gave a scintillating description of Henry J. Ain't, commonly known as the absolute. The absolute, says Gluck, is that ever-existing emptiness surrounded by its own outpouring of all which are unreal. The center of this emptiness is the middle and around the edge, while it is bordered by its own commencement. Whereupon said friend was deeply impressed. "What does it look like?" he asked then. "In order to see it," was the answer, "you must close your eyes in a dark room and look at the inside of the lids." "Is it intelligent?" asked the friend. No, said Gluck. "Intelligence is all illusionary. If it had the power of reason, it would be false. If it could see it, it would be unreal." "Oh, I think I grasp its import. In other words, it is, but it isn't." "Ah," answered Gluck, "your powers of erudition are in perfect line with the reality of things. I talk with the absolute every night." "How do you do it?" marveled the friend. "Why, I come into the realization that what is not, and what's left afterwards is." Said friend was duly impressed, bought a 5-cent collar button, and called it a day. The crowning glory of our trinity of unrealities is Professor Alpha Epsilon, the one who has impregnated the community with this divine misunderstanding. He is the branch of mistletoe which hangs above the arch of spiritual wisdom, the original discoverer of the absolute. Someone came along and out-absoluted him, whereupon he blossomed forth with the super-absolute, which is the dot in the center of the hole in the middle of the blank. If anyone out-supers him, he will probably discover the absolute, which has not been bothered with yet, being the hole in the center of the dot, which is the center of the vacuum surrounded by the blank of the previous chapter. Professor Epsilon had a falling upper plate and a celluloid collar. When he moves, like Mark Twain, he travels in a cigar box. Professor Epsilon is the one who can tell you all about something which he admits does not exist, and is the only real thing because it does not exist. We think our friend Diogenes must have been looking for this a while ago, but we understand his light went out somewhere along the line. Professor will bring you into union with isn't-ness, if you will cross his palm with is, the exchange of is being absolutely important to the realization of isn't. Professor Epsilon is the keeper of the vernacular at the lower end of which we start on our choice journey to the upper end, which is resting upon a hypothetical vacuum. Professor Epsilon is in a position to express himself upon the reality of things because he has learned to know the folly of knowledge, and his first great instruction is that to think is excessively dangerous to the realization of the plan, because if you pursued this path, will speedily separate you from him, which would result in a decline in his finance. Professor Epsilon is a master of abstraction, but the greatest abstraction which he is capable of doing is to abstract money from a sealed pocketbook. Now, what is the philosophy of the true absolute? Let us analyze this problem in a rational, sensible manner. Every time an individual has an idea these days, he forms a new religion. Every time he has two ideas, it splits up and fights itself. So nothing reasonable is ever arrived at. The absolute is not a new discovery, and the existence of the supreme unformed as the hypothetical base of formation is accepted in every religion of the world. Undoubtedly, there is an absolute cause, the perfect base of impermanence from which all things came and to which they shall return, therein completing the gamut of their existence. The abstract is the divine Atma, the definitionless base of all definable things. From the invisible cause, all pour the shadow shapes of effects which play out in the world of mortality, the divine chess game of the infinite. Why were these sparks projected into matter? Why is the universe peopled with great hierarchies of evolving individualities, which Spencer called the infinite diversities of unity? Is not this battlefield upon which man learns to know one little stage, one little step in his ultimate growth? Who then knows the absolute in fullness, save him who is the master of the gamut of his manifestations? Who shall know the reality, save the reality itself? There is an absolute God, the changeless base of ever-changing expression, neither male nor female nor both, neither high nor low nor both. This infinite cause all, this self-knowing one, who yet recognizes himself only through his manifestation, this one is the absolute. He is to man absolutely unattainable, for between him and man's consciousness there is a void, a gap, which 82,000 hierarchies of celestial beings cannot span. The God of solar systems and the gods of cosmic schemes themselves know not the light nor the source thereof. The doctrine of the absolute is a true one, but it is one of those truths which is worthless at this stage of evolution. There is no constructive application for it, for there is no sense of consciousness in the soul of man that is capable of even knowing the hem of its garment, let alone to grasp its magnificence. If someone told you they had 1 billion pennies and another told you they had 5 billion pennies, what picture would you have in your mind? All you could say is that one had more than another. Man is incapable of mentally differentiating between 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion, 1 septillion, or 1 quintillion. It is just a lot more, that is all. When we try to realize that in this cosmos of ours there are more solar systems, universes, chains, globes, and spheres than there are atoms in the bodies of creation, then it looks rather big. They're not counted by octillions until they are counted by 100 octillions of octillions, and many times that. The Milky Way is made up of universes many times larger than our own, each tiny spark a chain containing limitless evolving atoms. What child is there born of earth capable of expressing or knowing or imagining the qualities of the limitless intelligence that governs these things? The human mind is absolutely incapable of attempting the struggle. To try to define the absolute is to defile it and to deny it. The dreaming savior, saint, or sage is unworthy even to whisper it. Gods themselves dare not breathe it, for even his eldest sons have never lifted the hem of his mantle. And yet there are people who might be respectable burglars, which would be infinitely superior to being disreputable bunglers, which they are at the present time, who rave about that of which they not know, and cast lots for garments that gods dare not dream of. With the puny intelligence of a grain of sand, they seek to show the stuff that gods are made of. It is a foolish waste of time, and if persisted in, will inevitably result in insanity, for the brain is not capable of juggling such tremendous units of intelligence. There is but one path by which the absolute may be reached, and that is by following the winding stairs of human progress, upward and upward, until finally it achieves union with its source of being. The labors of man in this world, period, are not to produce gods, but to produce human beings, and the student of the absolute would be far better off if he would try to be a credit to the human race, instead of spending his time trying to discredit the unknowable. He does the best he can, but he cannot find in the universe that which he is not. Therefore, the Absolute becomes full of whims and fancies placed there by those who seek to know him, but could only reflect from his subtle shield their own souls. The world needs people to be truly human, to learn how to master and express the truly concrete qualities which we are here to build. We must have the dreamer and the sage, but he must dream dreams to serve his brother man and not try to build with his own feeble imagination a creature which even the gods dare not to imagine. Our modern thought is wandering from the field of practical things into the vistas of impracticality. If we are to attain the acme of this race, let us realize that to be perfect human beings is the ultimate of our goal, and that godhood is not the perfection of human beings. The most glorious concept in the world today is the concept of the perfect man. That dream is attainable. By labors it may be made practical. By conscientious living it becomes a reality. And if people who spend their time quoting the isness of am would leave their intellectual stimulants alone and go out into the world to manifest the isness of their own spiritual consciousness by being cleaner, better, and truer than their brother man, the Absolute would be perfectly able to take care of itself. 100 million years from now, with his greatest effort, man will only be a shade closer to the infinite. But that shade is everything, for in eternity time is dissolved in works. And still the Absolute remains veiled in the mantle of his own obscurity, untouched, unfathomed, and undreamed of by those who call his name but do not know his spirit. He slumbers in the infinite void of being, the baseless all. In him the words spin and move while man dwells as an atom in his formless body. Worlds and universes are but cells in his endless being, and no man shall ever know him, for he is wrapped in the robes of his own omnipotence. 'Tis blasphemy to strive to rend this garment, a blasphemy which gods dare not assail. But man, puny in his own strength, but great in his egotism, assails to do that which gods do fear, and as a fool to walk the path where wise men dare not tread. He could walk to the ends of chaos, and yet the sweeping folds of the infinite would remain concealed. His duty is not to unveil the Absolute, but to nourish and feed one little spark within his own soul. That labor is too great for him. Why then should he assail the wheel from which the sparks are born? As he cannot temper the steel of his own spirit, why should he attempt to wield the sledgehammers of Vulcan? His own character is more than he can govern. Why then should he seek to govern the infinite? His modesty is his strongest virtue, and those who assail to storm the temple of the Absolute are shorn of their virginity and are gowned in the robes of egotism. Let the Absolute slumber in its death-like stillness. Let the unknowable remain unmoved in his meditations. For his meditations are the universe and worlds dropping as pearls from his lips. Let the servant be found among men to carry on the work of keeping these pearls in sanctity and reverence, worrying not of their source. For how shall man, with a mind of matter, carry the thoughts of eternity and live? Close down the veil, lest passing through too soon the flame should destroy all. Teach man to live, to love, to labor, and to grow. Teach him to better fulfill the labors of the lesser, and leave in the hands of the infinite that which he can alone know and master. These thoughtless words of things we know not of brand us only fools. The lightness of our tone as we speak of nature's deepest mystery proves us unworthy of the trust. For the Absolute is in all, will be all that ever shall be. Gods, men, and worlds are whispered words from his mouth wrapped in the veils of matter. No mortal eye shall gaze upon its depth, but as the presence of this being draws ever nearer, man will sink into a depthless sleep, and there be one with the Father of all, whom he may not know, but in whose arms he shall never cease to be. Editorials. General Grump. The scene of this little narrative is in an old soldier's home, and its leading character is an old Civil War veteran who has for years been known as General Grump. His pension indicates the fact that he was never higher than a private in the rear ranks, but his imperious temperament, his positive ways, and his grumpative personality has gained for him the name and title which he now bears. He has been in the soldier's home for many years, stamping around and complaining. Something is the matter all the time. We must try and draw a picture of General Grump for you. He is about 5'10" high and 5'10" wide. He has small beady black eyes set under heavy overhanging brows. He slouches. When he walks, he can scarcely open his mouth without profanity issuing forth. He stamps his cane, and his white chin whiskers stand straight up when anyone around him has anything cheerful to say. His favorite expression is, "This is a hell of a world." He's always taking the joy out of life, for the rest of the inmates and those quiet, peaceable old folks who like to gather around checkerboard or play solitaire are eternally disturbed by the general who stalks about, pounding on the floor with his cane, cussing everyone in particular and life in general. Everything seems to have gone wrong with the general. He is the most abused man that ever lived and admits it. He has always suffered from tough luck, and now, as his 81st year draws to a close, we find him with a mean disposition as the only product of his life, with various forms of profanity and tough luck tales as the byproducts. In other words, General Grump is a born grouch. His grandfather had been a grouch before him, and his father, Silas, had been known as Hard Cider for years, his name so changed to suit his temperament. General Grump kicks at the beans, swears at the bread, and cusses the service until he bids fair to out-grouch 10 generations of ancestors. So he is the hero of our little life drama. One day, after rising from the table and passing out onto the steps that led down to the driveway, General Grump saw a carriage winding up past the stacked muskets which ornamented the front door of the soldier's home. There were 2 people in the carriage, but only one of them is of a special interest to us, and that is Uncle Ben. Of course, you do not know Uncle Ben, so we will have to go into details here also. Uncle Ben had been a captain in the Civil War, and in that war he had lost one arm, one leg, and both eyes. And in the years since, he had gone his way the best he could. Uncle Ben had not seen the world since 1863, and now, more than 80 years old, he was coming to the soldier's home when the death of his only child had left him no home in the world. With his crutch and cane and the assistance of his companion, a county official, Uncle Ben slowly climbed the steps and entered the office of the home, where in due form and time he was established. Thus entered the most interesting inmate of the soldier's home. It was several days after this that Uncle Ben and General Grump met, both sitting in broken-down easy chairs on the porch. "This is a hell of a life," grunted General Grump. "It looks like rain. It looked like rain for the last 2 weeks. Wish to hell it'd rain." "Does it look like rain?" asked Uncle Ben. "You know, I haven't seen a cloud since they gathered over Gettysburg, and that was a long time ago." "I told you it was a hell of a life," answered General Grump, his brows contracting and the corners of his mouth going down. "I don't know," answered Uncle Ben. "I ain't had a lot of trouble in my time. I can't say it's so bad. I've learned many things in these years of darkness, and many things that I have not yet seen I have felt. Now you, sir, I cannot see you, but I know you have a kindly face." "Well, if you do, you're the first feller that ever did," answered General Grump. "All the world looks kindly to me. In all the years that I have hobbled through life, broken and lame, I have always heard kind words. There has always been someone to help, and the world has been good to me. And life hasn't been so hard either. You know, even though I lost my eyes and one hand, I used to get work. They were always willing to help me. I've been very fortunate. I've been rich in love of my children who stayed with me and loved me until they too were called. Indeed, I have been very fortunate all these years." I haven't been fortunate, answered General Grump. Treated me like hell. Are you blind too? Asked Uncle Ben. Nope. Then how fortunate you have been, and how thankful you should be that you went through that great war. You have been able to see your loved ones. I could only know mine when I ran this hand over their faces. You should be very happy. Ah, hell. Did you lose your arms or legs? Nope. You were not injured then? Hell no. I wish they'd killed me. I suppose it is wrong, said the kindly old man softly, to be jealous, but somehow, brother, I envy you. You can see the world I cannot. You can walk around and I cannot. You can work and I cannot. I suppose it is human that I should envy you. There is only one thing about you I do not envy, and that is your voice. That does not sound pleasant. I fear you are not happy. You have all that God gave you, and I was broken before the work was well begun, but let me tell you, brother, I have been content. While the world outside means nothing to me, I live in a different world, a world of make-believe, a world I have made for myself. Wherever I go, the sun is shining, though others tell me it rains. Whoever I meet is smiling, though others tell me they weep. All the world is such a wonderful place, and I, all these years behind my prison walls, have never been able to reach it, but I have made a go out of it, and everything seems good. In the silence of my life I have thought, for I have had few companions but my thoughts and the voices of my children. During all these years, when sleeping and waking all was dark, I have dreamed, and I have dreamed the infinite dreams. These darkened eyes have seen things that mortal eyes shall never see. This broken form has come closer to living than those who have all. Brother, do not be despondent. You have so much to make you glad. You have so much more than I have, that it ill behooves that I should cheer you. And yet, let me tell you this. We live in a world of our own making, and this world that I have made is just as real to me as it is to you. Through all these years, I've never lost sight of the goodness of things. On that bloody field at Gettysburg, where the bursting shrapnel closed my eyes forever, I saw many things. I then saw the uselessness of hate, the fruitlessness of discord. I saw that man, not God, made sorrow. And if he made sorrow, he can make joy too. Listen, brother. Through all these years of darkness, I can still sing the songs I used to know. And then the old man's voice broke out in a tune of long ago, an old plantation song. The song of the farmer and the workman that sounded through our nation in the 60s. His voice was thin and cracked, and true, there was not much tune, but there was great joy in the voice. See, I can sing as I used to. And Uncle Ben's eyeless face broke into a merry smile. I can remember how they used to sing those when I was a boy. How glad I am that I have memory, for I have little else. I suppose God has been good to me, and while others' memories fail them, the scenes of my youth grow clearer every day, and I can see the great blue sky and the singing birds. The old man's hand reached out and fumbled for the hand of the other. Brother, be glad and smile with me. Our time is but a little while. The world will smile with you, brother, if you will but smile too. The old man's face lighted up with something akin to inspiration, and his very presence seemed to breathe light and truth. General Grump was silent. He could not help but think back in his own life and see how much joy he had had, how much more he had had than this one who sat beside him. Are you really happy? He asked. Happy? Asked the old man. Why shouldn't I be happy? I've been happy in the realization of duty well done. I have been happy in the love of a faithful wife. I have been happy in the love of my children. I have been happy in the love of my God. For many years past, I have been happy in the happiness of others. I can do little for my fellow man, but I have tried to make him happy. I make him forget his cares and fears in the happiness of real living, in the happiness of just being where he can hear the voice of other things. General Grump tilted his hat on his head and looked at Uncle Ben for some minutes. How long have you been blind? He asked. 53 years I've been blind as I am today, for one shell did it all. Were you never down on the world? Oh, yes, said Uncle Ben, smiling sweetly. After it happened, I thought there was nothing left to live for, but one day I found that I hadn't lost anything that could compare with the thing I gained. The general looked at him for several minutes, and as he gazed into the radiating face of the old man whose sightless eyes stared out into eternity, General Grump heaved a little sigh and the corners of his mouth came up. I guess I've been a fool for some time, he muttered, and he looked down at his hands. I've got both of them. And at his feet, I have them too, and my eyes. And here I've been moping all these years. Life is a wonderful thing, answered the old man beside him. We seldom learn to live it until it is nearly done. That's the hell of it, answered General Grump, stamping on the porch with his cane. Yes, sir, that's the hell of it. And getting up, he stumped off in irate rage. Occult Fiction. The Man Who Found God. There is a story told of a great scientist who built a unique laboratory far from the sight of man, where he installed mighty instruments and many wondrous mechanical contrivances, all to achieve a single end: to create an instrument wherewith he might span the chasm twixt man and God. The years went by, and the scientist labored tirelessly upon the child of his dream. Wheels and levers were slowly placed, and after many years the great shape of a looming mechanical mystery rose from the floor of the laboratory as the completed result. As a young man, the scientist had commenced his labors. Many years had passed, years of consecration to a single end. Years of concentration upon a single work. He had never lived in the world of men since a disappointment of his early life which had broken his trust in his fellow man, and the moving events of earth meant little to him. His great machine meant all. So we find the snow of an ever-gathering winter upon his bowed head. Long lines and furrows mark his face, and his piercing eyes sink ever deeper beneath the massive brows and tawny lashes. His body is bent and frail, and long purple veins show out upon his hands. For him, this span of earth is nearly done, yet in his soul is the same flame of youth which had inspired him in the ages gone. The same indomitable will had never been broken, for within him burned the determination to perfect the machine which would connect spirit and matter, to finish his great work whereby the veil should rent and mystic nature give up her secrets. His laboratory was a great domed room built like an astronomical observatory. In the ceiling were a number of trapdoors, while the entire room revolved by pulleys, counterweight, and bearing. He had but to press a button, and the floor rose some dozen feet, carrying with it the great machine. He need but pull a lever, and countless windows in the dome opened at prismatic angles, casting gleams of light upon the almost shapeless mass of wheels. He had but to turn a knob upon the wall, and the great machine itself swayed back and forth to any angle, balanced upon gigantic steel rockers. Each day brought the moment of victory closer. Each day the fire of triumph flashed stronger in the aged man's eyes, and the cold blood rushed faster through his veins until, at last, the great day came. The last wheel was in place, the final bearing was tested, and the great machine stood. A mammoth dream of a man who gives his all to learn that which he knows not. The great scientist sent into the world of men and drew around him the mightiest minds of the time, that they might gather in the vaulted room to see and hear the marvel of a life's labor. They came from all over the country, with hoary heads and weighty brows, with dignity and age. They gathered to see the fruitage of a life's work. 12 in all they were, great astronomers, great physicists, masters of logic and philosophy. They gathered from their several ways at the foot of this mighty instrument. The time of the experiment was at midnight, and as the clock struck 12, they all gathered in the domed room with its levers and its wondrous mechanism. The old scientist came, and in his face the exultation of youth told the mystery he had conceived. When I open those great shutters in the ceiling, each of the prismatic panes shall gather in the light of the stars, the light of the planets, of suns and moons. The intelligences that rule them all shall be concentrated tonight upon these sensitized plates, built like the sense centers of the human organism. Here is an ear as fine as that of any man, threads so delicate that only a microscope can show them, an organ which can hear all things. Here are the vocal cords of slender steel and catgut, wherein sounds of infinite may be reproduced. Here are eyes of metals and fiber as perfect as any organ of human sense. And here, gentlemen, is the masterpiece of all, a brain of precious metal, with every nerve and sinew, with every force and power. I've built a god, an oracle of matter which is capable of using the light brain of the infinite, one who shall speak to us, inspired by the rays of planets and the stars. This brain will register the thoughts of God. These lips shall speak his will. These ears shall hear his infinite melody. These eyes shall see his wonders. 70 years I've been building this machine, far more perfect than any body built by man, and tonight I shall quicken it with the ray of 100 million stars, of suns, globes, and universes, by concentrating their endless light through these prisms in the roof, and finally reflecting them all upon this gigantic sounding board wherein shall be given out the mystery of creation. This chair is where I shall sit to work the tuning forks and coils that each thought of the infinite mind shall vibrate through this brain. Marvelous, murmured the group of scientists gathered around. Marvelous, but impossible. No, it is not impossible, cried the old man vehemently. Gentlemen, give me just this night, and I will prove that it is not impossible. Gentlemen, you have little trouble to expect from me. If this machine shall fail, I shall kill myself. I have lived alone to create it. With its failure, I shall die. But it shall not fail. By all the laws of natural dynamics, by all the laws of science, of invention, of mechanics, of electricity, and of nature's subtle forces, it shall not fail. Now, gentlemen, as he calmed himself with a mighty effort, we will raise this machine. He pressed the button on the wall. A shudder ran through the floor of the building, and almost imperceptibly the floor moved upward. The scientists gazed around in amazement. The entire laboratory was upon a gigantic elevator which carried workroom, instrument, and men upward into the dome of the observatory. Finally, some dozen feet from the dome, the progress of the moving floor was stayed, and then with the delicate astronomical instruments, the scientist arranged his mighty machine, tilting it upon its massive rockers until all pointed to a single ray, which was to be the keynote of the machine, the planet Saturn. Now, gentlemen, will you please be seated? And the scientist waved his hand to a circle of 12 leather easy chairs which surrounded the instrument. I'm going to ask you to please remain silent during this test for fear that the vibration of your voices might derange the currents. The wise and learned took their seats. The gray-browed philosophers leaned back in their chairs, their gaunt frames at rest, but their minds tensely centered upon the great experiment. If it succeeds, breathed one, both past and future shall unite in blessing the inventor. The inventor gave one last look at the great creature of steel and wire, the child of his hopes, the creation of his dreams, the supreme achievement of his life, and then pressed a tiny button on the wall. The great electric arc lights went out, and the observatory was enveloped in total darkness. Darkness which seemed peopled with mystic shapes and thrilled with a stillness that was audible. Nothing but the low breathing of the watchers and an occasional slight movement in one of the chairs told that a living creature was anywhere in that still room. Suddenly there came a grating sound, and the whole room was flooded with a strange blue-white light filled with rainbow colors and dancing, flinging, swirling sparks of iridescent hue. The great prisms in the ceiling had been thrown in place, and 100 million stars sent their tiny rays down into the room. A gasp went round the circle in the easy chairs. Marvelous, marvelous. This opaline light bathed the machine in a weird and unnatural glow and revealed the wizard of genius standing by its side, his eyes turned upward to the millions of sparks reflected upon the prisms in the ceiling, and between the dark blue of the sky appeared as a pierce of plush, jeweled with diamonds. Slowly he turned the mighty arm of the crank, and the prisms moved one after the other until the light focused into a little spot, no larger than a 10-cent piece. One gigantic finger of concentrated power. This was turned upon a sensitive organ of steel and silken wire which glowed and gleamed like the mighty Koh-i-Noor. The professor sat down, his hand on the tuning fork and coil, and his eyes fastened to the fine dials before him which quivered like the nerves of a racehorse. The air was filled with a droning, moaning sound which seemed like the rush of mighty bodies through the sky. Something oppressed the eardrums of those sitting around, and a faintness of nausea stole over them. But still, sturdy searchers that they were, to whom life meant nothing and knowledge everything, they remained in their chairs, gazing at the strangest sight man has ever witnessed. A gigantic madman, a genius possessed of insanity, that dared to build lips of steel for God to talk with. As the professor sat there, his hand upon the dials, a great chill came over him. He seemed wrapped in a damp blanket and began to shiver in spite of himself. But his eyes never left the tiny spot of light, vari-colored and ever-changing, seemed to hiss and sputter as it struck the discs. I shall soon know all, he kept muttering to himself. The mystery shall be unveiled to me. Suddenly the light ray seemed to pass through the discs and spread like a phosphorescent glow all over the great machine. The blazing eye of steel seemed to blink at him, and the nerve wires to twitch. I shall win, breathed the scientist. At last man shall know. At last the infinite shall be attained. The mystery shall be solved. As he spoke, the glow of light seemed to condense itself into a ball, opal-like in its formation, its color and shape ever changing, its position ever moving. It hung swaying, twisting, and turning in the very center of the great machine. Then there unfolded from it like mighty arms 2 streamers of wing-like force which poured out as flaming fins from the sides of this shapeless globe. The scientist gazed in awe and amazement at the strange phenomena unfolding itself before him. He wanted to call the attention of the other watchers to it, but for some unknown reason his tongue refused to speak. All he could do was point his finger and gasp. The minutes passed, and there slowly formed itself out of the flaming mist a great opaline figure many times larger than a human being. A great glorious figure surrounded by a halo of light and wings of steely force. Only the head seemed well defined and was formed out of the great ball. The robes and draperies streamed off into nothingness, while the fingers were hazy streams of flame pointing first in this way and in that. A great roaring rumble filled the air, and the eardrums of the old scientist seemed ready to burst. He could not, however, keep his eyes from the shining face, so terrible yet so magnificent, beautiful yet relentless in every part of its being. Great streaming eyes of living fire gazed out serenely upon the face of the aged man, and yet the serenity itself was terrifying. "Are you God?" gasped the old man. "Had I but known what you were, I fear I would not have dared call you." The great figure shook its head, and a voice sounded in the man's soul, words which lips could not frame. "No, I am not God. I am the least of his messengers. I it is who have been appointed to unveil to you the mysteries you have waited 70 years to learn. Since time began, you have sought the mysteries that are so carefully hidden by merciful deity, who conceals his own power that man may not die from his flame. Man flutters around the throne of light like the moth around the candle flame until finally, singed and battered, he falls to rise no more. I stand here as the guardian of the earth, for you have launched upon it a power which could burn it to the core, could throw the planets from their several orbits and twist creation into a ruined mass. But this is not the privilege of mortal man. Therefore these rays of light, I receive them to myself, lest passing me they should destroy you. Who are you? Moaned the scientist. I am the Lord of the Light, Devas. Look. And his great flaming hand closed over the disk of steel and celluloid, crumpling them to pieces. 'Tis better that these should perish than that man should lose this ray which could slay across the universe in the hands of the foolish, and yet can raise the dead. Let this thing of steel perish and man live. As for you, sir, come, I would show you something. Beckoning to the aged man, the flaming spectre rose and pointed along the ray of light that led to the prisms in the ceiling. This golden ray seemed to form stairs as they ascended. Where am I going? Asked the professor. Into cosmos upon the ladder you have formed, answered the guide. Draperies of many subtle substances seemed to brush the face of the scientist. Lights danced in the ethers about him. Swaying figures surrounded him, and far off the planets in the sky gazed down with the same great faces as the one of his guide, only greater and more noble. Criss-cross currents, which were themselves words and sentences of living fire, connected the globes together like cords passing through beads to make a necklace of the whole. Is this God? Asked the scientist in awe. No, it is not, answered the Deva. Do you see this great blue haze in which these things float in endless pageantry? Yes, answered the scientist. Is that God? The Great One shook his head. 'Tis but the hem of his garment, he answered. Do you hear this strange song of wild fantastic symphony, mighty roars and tender cadences, heavy rumbles and soft purrings as of the flutter of a bird's wing? Great seething comets and tails of viridic power, these make up the creations of the uncreated. These are the least of the great, the unimportant of the mighty. How, then, can I gather his power into my machine? Asked the scientist. You cannot, answered the Shining One. You but take one single sound and upon a string of steel seek to hear the harmonies for which all nature alone is not a complete sounding board. Then I have worked in vain, muttered the scientist. No, answered the Great One, you have only found the way. Many substances must sound in harmony before God talks to man. Spirit, mind, and matter are alone organs of his speech, the eyes of his vision, the ears of his understanding. Long the science failed in that. In earth they seek the things of heaven. In steel, stone, and stick they have sought the God which rests alone in the infinite. Come with me, and I will answer your riddle, the riddle of all living things, the riddle of the eternal future which no man knoweth, of the ultimate which is concealed, the completion as yet veiled by the density of mortal thought. The Shining One passed slowly on, and behind him walked the professor, searching and seeking with a new light and deeper understanding the answer to the riddle. About an hour passed. The light still shone down from the ceiling, but the passing of the orbs of night had moved it from the dial. The waiting scientists moved uneasy in their chairs. Isn't it about time something happened? Muttered one under his breath. It seems to me it is, answered his companion in an undertone. At last one bolder than the rest spoke, saying, Professor, have we not waited long enough? But no answer sounded. Professor, he called again, still no sound. One of the watchers reached into his pocket and, drawing out a match, struck it and held it aloft. It gleamed on the mighty instrument, and upon it also the figure of the scientist who sat in the chair, his head upon his chest. "Why, he has gone to sleep," exclaimed one, and rising to his feet he fumbled around till he found the light button, which he pressed, flooding the room with brilliance. Poor man, he was all tired out by his experiment. He leaned over and touched the professor's forehead, then sharply drew back his hand. Then he placed his ear to the aged man's heart. Rising, he spoke solemnly to the other 11. "The inventor is dead. He died on the night when his supreme achievement was to be given to the world, when man through a thing of steel would learn to know his God." As he spoke, there came a humming, droning sound. The wheels in the machine were moving. The great lips of steel opened, and a voice, deep and terrible, spoke. "I see, I see, I see. No, no, no." At the same instant, the machine was galvanized by a bolt of electricity. When it had cooled again, it was welded into a solid block. No wheel or piston could be moved. Occult Fiction. The Dance of the Devas. According to a legend that is as old as the rock-hewn temples of the Himalayas, there is far up on the side of Mount Everest a cave hollowed out in the solid rock of the mountain. Its pillars and columns are of living stones, their surfaces chiseled into wondrous flowers and arabesques. The ancient temple is a mystic maze of passageways, twisting in and out from unknown depths back again into eternity. None ever seem to know how old this temple is, but it was called the Shrine of the Devas. The average mortal never learns of its existence, and even the devout Hindu may search his life through and never learn of its existence. It has one duty, one labor to perform. It is the temple of temptation, where the Eastern initiates, seeking the life of immortality, pass the test of the astral world. The entrance of this temple is built like the human ear, and far into the earth its passageways twist and turn like the labyrinth of the human ear. Upon its walls are traced slender filaments like the fine threads of the auditory nerve, and to drop a single pin in the depth of that cave is to produce a thundering roar, so perfect are the acoustics. Many have heard of Diocletian's ear, where the emperor sat in a cave of stone to listen to the whispering of his prisoners. But this cave, in the heart of India, is more wondrous far than this ear of a Roman emperor, for it is the cave of the Devas, the sound creatures of eternity. One at a time, the appointed children of light enter into this cave to learn of immortality, to pass from mortal tribulation to the tranquility of omnipotence. Some years ago, a truly great one passed through the ear of the Devas, and we will follow his wanderings among its carved pillars and terraced sculptures. 3 figures approached the door, a massive pivot of stone, which swung away when they pressed upon it. 2 were old men dressed in yellow robes, their heads shaven, and upon their foreheads the mark of the illuminated. The third was a youth who walked in silence and deep asceticism between the 2, in the great repose of the 4th step. Without a sound, the 2 priests stepped aside, allowing him to enter, and then they separated, one going to the right and the other to the left. Resting on each side of the cave entrance was a large flat stone. Here each took his seat, twisting his feet up underneath him and crossing his palms upon his lap. Then slowly the eyeballs of each turned upward, eyelids drooping, and the priests entered into meditation for strength, peace, and power to the wanderer. In the meantime, the youth was entering the darkened cave. It was not totally black, but a very faint phosphorescent glow was emitted by the rocks, just enough that he might not stumble against the pillars nor fall by missing the steps. Around and around wound the candidate, through the labyrinth of the rock-hewn ear, his bare feet making but little sound, and even this becoming a faint rumble in the taut stillness of the cave. At last he reached the end of the spiral, where his great twisting nautilus of stone ended in a small circular chamber, from which arches ran in all directions. In this chamber was a great tree carved from the solid stone of the mountain. Under this tree, with its branching wealth of stone-carved leaves, was a smooth rock, and upon this the candidate seated himself to await the pleasure of his god. As he sat there poured forth from the subterranean arches streams of shining gas, which wreathed and twisted in the phosphorescent darkness. As these streamers came closer, the lights resolved themselves into glorious creatures in swaying draperies. Great eyes gazed at the candidate. Great forms came forth, demon shapes, whose bloodshot eyes gazed at him in blinking terror. Slowly these forms swayed back and forth to a great rhythmic beating like the pulsing of a human heart. Back and forth they swayed in endless glory, passing round and round the seated figure, performing in the mystic ethers of this subterranean vault the dance of the Devas. These forms kept beckoning to him, and from their lips poured forth great streams of music, seeking to lull the soul of the candidate. Slowly, a subtle dream trance stole over him, and he felt himself being drawn from his rocky couch to join in that endless chant and mystic dance. With a great effort, he drew himself back, crying out, "I take my refuge in Buddha." Still the figures called him, and the music as of 1,000 stringed instruments and peals like those of mighty organs echoed and re-echoed through the ear of the gods. Deafened by the sound, his head swinging and his body torn, the candidate swayed in his meditation and sought to launch himself into the endless rhythm of the Devas' dance. And then, with a mighty effort, he drew back his mind upon Buddhi and remained in meditation, saying, "All these are the great unreality. They shall not lead me from my appointed task. Man who serves these Devas and joins in the dance shall never attain nirvana. Nor by opposing them shall he destroy them, but only through the realization of the divine presence." From out of the carved arches poured another stream of mystic beings who floated about like the beautiful undines in the ethers of the ocean. Streams and rays of light poured from them, and they twisted through the air like winged creatures from other worlds. They wound themselves around the figure of the meditating aspirant. They twined their arms about him, seeking to lead him from his meditation. Through half-closed lips, the youth replied, "All these are of the world of illusion. You shall not tempt me, Devas of the flame being." This whispered, they cried out, and through the subtle essences of the cave their voices sounded as music in his ears. But still he remained in silence, the silence of deep contemplation upon the body of Brahma. Then there issued forth from the mystic corridors a trooping band of fiends, great seething creatures of demon proportions, with the heads of beasts and of dragons, and the crawling forms of reptiles and snakes. These too surrounded him and dashed at him, leering and screaming. The chill of fear crept into the heart of the candidate, and when it did so, these great slimy forms grew greater and stronger. He sought to leave the cave and to escape these terrifying creatures that raised flaming fingers to destroy him. Then came the thought of his work, and he remained. "Thou too art creatures of Maya. What have I to do with you? How can you harm me if I am at peace with myself? I have naught to fear of you." And closing his eyes, the youth returned to his deep meditation, in which these seething forms vanished forever, and he became lighted by his Buddha. It was the strangest scene that man ever looked upon in the cave of the labyrinth. On a tiny altar of stone, under the shade of a tree of solid granite, sat the yellow-robed priest, his legs crossed and his hands folded. Around him were 3 circles of supernatural beings. The first swayed and moved as they passed in endless circle to the right. The second danced their weird dance to the left, while the third worked back and forward and as flaming fiends attacked the body of the candidate. This was the dance of the Devas, when the great beings from other worlds tested the courage of the candidate's soul. Slowly he sank into ever deeper meditation until even the realization of eternity was obliterated from his soul, and alone in the great ever-existing the candidate saw nothing, heard nothing, felt nothing. And there he remained while they danced their weird dance, Slowly there radiated from him a glow of light that grew ever stronger until it lighted the very carved arches with its presence. Then, like mists, the phantom forms dissolved into the shadows, and in their place there entered from the corridor a great stream of yellow-robed figures. A new door had opened, and from the realms of Shidaloka, the saints had come to bless the newborn Buddha and his working. Slowly they passed in endless file, a swaying mystery of phantom forms, until they too vanished in the gloom of the cave. Then through the darkness great faces appeared, many times the size of human face. The great ones of the 7 worlds gazed upon the initiate. Impelled by an inner urge which he could not understand, the youth rose, ascended the altar, and passed slowly outward through the spirals of the ear. At the gate sat the 2 priests, still in meditation. With his hands folded, the newly awakened one passed onward and outward into the worlds of his activity, worlds that were no longer his because he had unveiled them. So the priest was again in the world, but not of it, for the veil of Maya had been torn away, while the Devas danced in the labyrinth of the ear. Occult Fiction. The Homage. Civilization, with its spreading power, dissolves into itself as quicksilver the wild places of the world. Where mighty forests once raised their crested tops, gloomy buildings, chimneys, and iron girders now darken narrow cobbled ways where the natural grandeur of things has been swallowed up in the sordidness of human concept. Here and there, however, are still spots where the devastating hand of man has not rested, where the sound of the axe, the cries of the woodman, and the rumbling of logs has not broken the primeval stillness. One by one, the savage denizens of the wild, the beasts untamed, have slunk away into these untrodden places, into the rocky mountains and lonely crags where they gaze out with great furtive eyes at the hand of civilization which, as it devastates the primeval wilderness, strangles out their lives. In a certain land where there is a mighty range of mountains, which raise their rough and wooden sides like great supplicating arms to the skies, the barrenness of these hills is clothed with the verdant garment of tree and shrub. Mighty straggling monarchs of the forest toss their branches upward as though to grasp in their shaky fingers the clouds that hover over them. A narrow trail winds up these mountains, barely a footpath. Here and there it leads over loose rocks and broken boulders from stone to stone across some waterfall that descends like a stream of crystal from the snow peaks far above. There is no silence in that wood, for there is ever a swishing, ever a rippling, ever a sighing, as from the mountains pour the streams of water, or through the treetops the wind whispers its message to any ears that are there to hear. Up this narrow path climbs an occasional hunter, for the deer still peer shyly out from the thickets, or spring from rock to rock and amid the scrub growth that clothes the walls that rise on either hand. Here, too, the mountain lion lurks, and at night his shining eyes gaze from the darkness at the campfire of the hunter. Here also are wolves and foxes, and in the lower valleys dwell coyotes that howl in the gathering shadows as the shades of the evening fall. Mayhaps an awkward bear will cross the path and waddle along on his short, ungainly legs. It is the joy place of the hunter, who with the glee of the sportsman slays to prove the merit of his aim. There are many stories told of these mountains, many legends which the mind of the ancient red man fashioned and the mind of the jesting white man perpetuates. But there is one legend that is the strangest of all, the story of the old man of the mountain. It is said that somewhere up in those hills there lived a hermit who had dwelt there many days. As far back as the old hunters could remember, the story was told of how one, tired of the world and its shams, had crept away from all living things of men to go and live in the mountains, among the crags whose lofty peaks touched the sky. Once in a great while someone saw him far in the distance as he stood mirrored in some mountain lake or in sharp outline against the sky. They knew him as the old man of the mountain. the hermit of the mighty peaks. Some said he was good, some that he was strange and cruel, but all loved to tell of him, to guess and to speculate. Once in the course of human events there climbed up the mountain path that wound in and out along the rugged sides of the hills a whistling youth. Over his shoulder was slung a rifle, a cartridge belt was around his waist, and on his back he carried a pack. He was going into the hills to hunt. With the enthusiasm of youth, he would slay the lion and the bear, the deer and the wolves whose howlings he had heard from the valleys below. Round and round the path wound. The hours went by, the gloom of evening fell, and still the hunter was far from the crest of the mighty hill where the little scrub pines shone out from the ever-encircling band of snow. The chill of the mountain was in the air, the valley was long since dark, and tiny twinkling lights below showed the abode of men. Still the glow of daylight was on the mountain peak, and as the youth stood there, in the semi-twilight, the silence was broken by a crackling sound as of the breaking of twigs and the swishing of branches. Looking quickly around, the youth saw standing before him a mighty stag. His great arched antlers had a span of many feet, and his noble head was raised to catch the passing warning of the atmosphere. Two large, mild eyes gazed at the youth, who, in the frenzy of the hunter, reached for his gun and, drawing it rapidly to his shoulder, gazed along the cold steel sights toward the heart of the stag. Just as his finger was closing upon the trigger, a hand was laid upon his arm. The youth started. The gun slipped from his already nervous fingers, and he turned in amazement to gaze into the face of a strange being. As he turned, he gave a start, for such a figure few men have seen. The face bore the marks of great age, and the snowy locks that bordered it were whiter far than the mountain tops that had stood there since eternity. The figure of the old man, for such it was draped from head to foot in a cowl of grey cloth, and he carried a great wooden staff in his hand, cut from the limb of a dead tree. His eyes, however, were the wonder of the picture, two kindly, twinkling eyes that could register even the faintest shade of emotion, one moment gleaming with the joy and youth of life, and the next dimmed by the tears of sorrow, gazed into the face of the hunter. The old man's hand was resting lightly upon his shoulder, and his sweet old face held soft rebuke. You, began the youth, are you not the old man of the mountain? The stranger nodded his head, and a voice, mellowed by years of goodness, answered softly and kindly, Yes, I am the hermit who lives in these hills. But why do you shoot my stag? Your stag? Exclaimed the boy hunter. How goes it that you own the beast? In this world, the old man answered, proper use warrants ownership, and those who use God's creatures well have the first claim upon them. The old man held out his hand to the stag, and the great beast, though viewing the hunter askance, slowly came across the little clearing and rubbed his soft face against the old man's hand. The hermit put his arm around the neck of the stag and spoke to it in soft, sweet tones. Just a few sighing sounds like a pitiful cry the old man made, but the beast seemed to understand. Its soft nose was turned upward, and its eyes looked at him with a tenderness of expression which moved even the hunter. The old man turned to the youth. Do you still dispute my ownership? He asked. Do you still doubt that he is mine and I am his? What were the words you used? Asked the youth in surprise. How did you talk to him? I spoke in the words of the forest and the trees, he answered. That is his language. He hears life and love in the voice of the waterfall and the soft swaying of leafy branch. These are the sounds of his language, and during these many years in the mountains I have learned to talk with the tongue of beast and bird. Yes, I have even learned to talk with the trees and flowers who hear my voice and shelter me with their love and protection. Listen. The old man breathed out a soft, stirring sound like the breath of dawn in the treetops, and from the shrubs and bushes around an answer came. The same soft, stirring sound, and voices seemed to whisper. They all know me. They all love me. For I have lived here 80 years, and never once have I injured God's creatures. When I want food, they bring it to me, of the ripe fruits of their store. The little squirrels bring me nuts from their harvests, while the trees give me of their fruit, and from their own dried leaves they form a shelter which guards me in the chill of winter. You have come into these hills like the spirit of man oft times comes into the world, to slay and to hate. Not that you really care, for in your soul you do not loathe the beasts, but to you their souls mean no more than a drop of water from yonder stream. But I have learned to look upon with love even the drops of water, for each one has a message. I have lived up here so long that the trees and birds and flowers are one with me in spirit. I love them all, and truly they love me. Come, young hunter, lay your gun aside for a while. For in my eyes, and in the eyes of my children of the forest, that gun means hate and death. You need not fear. Leave it here, and I will bring you back for it anon. The youth laid down his rifle, and taking the hand which the old man held out to him, followed him away from the path out into the depth of the great green forest wrapped in evening shades. Mighty trunks rose up about him, falling leaves descended like a gentle rain upon him as he passed. Suddenly the old man stopped. "Look," he said. From the side of a tall tree a big gray squirrel came and stood, pertly gazing for a few seconds, then vanished like a little flash of dusky shadow to appear a second later carrying in his teeth a ripe hazelnut. Scampering down the rough trunk, he climbed up to the hermit's gray robe, and as the old man opened his mouth, the little gray squirrel placed therein the hazelnut. Then hopping on to the old man's shoulder, sat up there, his little beady eyes darting first in this way and then in that. The hermit took the nut from his mouth and held it out to the hunter. "See how they care for me? But it is no more tenderly than I have cared for them." He spoke a few soft words to the squirrel, which darted away like some little tree sprite into the darkness of the gathering night. He had barely vanished when the youth suddenly jumped back in fear and amazement. Before them on the road stood a great wolf, his tongue lolling out and great tusks bared. A growling howl broke from the beast. "He does not know you," the old man explained, "for whenever he sees men, they throw something at him. Whenever he meets them, he expects the flash of flame that pours from their rifles. Therefore he hates them even as they hate him. But come, you are perfectly safe." Then he stepped up to the wolf and, bending slightly, placed his hand between the beast's teeth. The wolf drew back its head and licked the kindly hand. "This," explained the hermit, "has its price. If you essayed this feat, your hand would pay the price, and probably your life." "But what have you done for the beasts that they should so love you?" "I have been true to them. In the cold winter nights I have sheltered their young in my little cabin. I have fed the babies that the hunters left parentless, and in the spring I have loosened them into the world. Many years ago a hunter climbed these hills and slew the sire of this wolf. Another slew its mother and 3 little cubs. 3 howling, fighting, spitting little handfuls of flesh were left in my hands. I nourished them and guarded them, and they played with my mountain lions and romped about with the bear cubs that I have in my cabin. The springtime came and they went their way, strong enough to protect themselves. This is one of them. The other 2 mayhaps we shall also see, unless the hunters have slain them." Then they went on further along the path of nature's miracles. The great stag walked behind them, his arched antlers breaking the tree branches as he passed. "Look here," the old man spoke, pointing to a crutch in a tree just a little ways ahead. "In this nest are 4 little birds. Yesterday the sound of a gun was heard in these mountains. There was a fluttering of wings, and with a screeching cry the mother bird fell downward from this nest. There was a great whir of wings, and with a hoarse cry of rage, the father bird flew straight into the face of the hunters. Another shot was fired, and he too was laid low without even a fighting chance. Now hear the cries in the trees. The old man climbed up onto the wooden stump, and from the encircling arms of a dead pine he drew a nest. In it several little shrilling specks of life with ugly featherless bodies and great gaping beaks. I shall take these too with me to my cabin, and drop by drop I will feed them as I have long ago learned to do. Their mother and father are gone, slain by one of my race. But among the beasts and birds I have tried to redeem my people and to prove to them that in the heart of man there is still a generous spirit. His soft hand cuddled the tiny birds in their nest, and with soft cries and a little shrill notes he sought to quiet them. In a few moments the cries from the nest ceased, and, sheltered by the old man's love, the little hungry birds rested until he could procure them food. The youth marveled at the sight, for he had never supposed that there could be among the worlds of men one who so loved dumb creatures. The old hermit pointed ahead through a little ravine that opened before them, and there the hunter saw the peaked roof of a tiny cabin surrounded by little fir trees, and with an old tile for a chimney. A quaint, picturesque building of logs, but poorly matched. Still, this simple structure was enthroned in a frame more beautiful than words can describe. Down below, the valley spread out beneath the endless grandeur of the rolling hills. By the side of it, the melting stream ran, while behind it, up and up, rose the peaks of the snow-capped mountains. This, indeed, was a home in the heart of nature. About the house could be seen a number of animals. A wildcat cub rolled around in the sunlight, and an old bear was asleep with his nose between his paws, his tail just a tiny stump that wiggled mechanically as he felt in his sleep the presence of his friend. Birds were roosting in the trees nearby, and within a dozen feet of the cabin were 20 bird nests, for it seemed the little creatures of the air desired to come and build their nests of twigs around the cabin door. The old man invited the youth in. They entered and sat upon sawed-off ends of logs which served as stools. The cabin was bare of furnishing, save for a rough straw pallet, and the only ornament was a wonderful ivory crucifix which hung upon the wall. The room was filled with birds and squirrels, and the young hunter stared in astonishment when he saw that a small hummingbird had built its nest in the arms of the crucifix. He then looked about for stove or food, but there was no sign of either. "So this is your home?" he murmured. "This is where the old man of the mountain lives?" "Yes," the hermit answered. "And here he has lived since the day when he realized that his brother man was false and that the beast was true. In all the world of men I found never a friend one half so faithful or one half so true as these wild beasts that live among the hills. When I look back at my sorrow of my life and the tears come to my eyes, my little birds all gather round me and sing their love songs in my ears. When I am tired, the great stag comes and bends his back that I may ride him. When I am hungry, then from the mountains and caves come birds and beasts with food for me. I have given up the world of human things to serve the things which man abuses, to which he has been false. These birds, these little creatures that play around my door, even the wolves, the foxes, and the mountain lions, they are my brothers, and I their father and their elder brother. I ease the wounds that heartless hunters make, and they know that while I live in this mountain they have one friend in all the world of men who will never be false. All the time that I have lived here, I have never spoken one harsh word to beast or bird, yet they serve me with perfect faith and perfect trust." A strange feeling came over the soul of the hunter. "I shall hunt no more," he murmured, "for I have seen the life and love and light in the souls of these beasts that shall be true to it." "That is well," said the old man slowly, and he extended his hand. "Brother, I am proud that you have seen the light which shall some time take from the world the karmic curse that rests upon all who slay their brothers. But night is falling in the mountains, and in the air I hear the cry of the bears and lions. I hear the pitiful wail of dying beasts, and I must go my way. so I will now take you back again to where I met you. I am an old man, and I have not much longer to stay here. But when I am gone, will you be true to the beasts whom I have loved and guarded, and who have loved me so well in return?" "Yes," answered the youth. "To me also the world has ever been an empty place, and I shall fill that emptiness with the same thing with which you have filled yours. If you are called, I promise I will come and live in your little hut and go about as you do to serve the beasts." The old man stood for a few seconds, dimly visible in his soft gray gown, while the youth, lighted by the waning moon, climbed down the twisting path to the world that lay below. It was about 4 years after when the youth went up again into the mountains. 4 years of sunshine and of rain, 4 years that changed the affairs of man but left the mountains just the same. The green grass, the lofty pines, and the great belts of whitened snow had apparently not changed at all. One morning as the sun arose, a strange scene confronted the eye. Over the mountain there hung a great gray cloud which twisted, turned, and seethed in a million ever-changing folds. The whole atmosphere in the mountains was hushed and still, and a great laden silence hung over nature. Hunters and trappers whispered that never before in all the years they had lived among the hills had they ever seen such a strange mystery before. As the day wore on, the dark cloud became deeper. A low moan broke out from the heavens. It rose and fell with the passing of the winds, a great sighing sound as that of the dying. Each tree seemed to pick it up, reverberate and echo it from their crests and branches. Little shrubs and bushes seemed also to bow their heads, while the arms of the lofty pines hung drear and dismal in the steely light. Up among the rocks great groaning sounds came, and masses of boulder and dirt became thundering avalanches upon the mountain sides. The snow upon the crest turned gray, and everything seemed to hang in awe and suspense during nature's agitation. That day the youth was impelled to climb again that mountain, and so he wound in and out along the little path, and following intuitional guidance, branched off from it, and after a short walk reached the point where the valley began and the mountain peaks left off. There among the rocks, half hidden by the darkness, stood the little cabin as he had seen it before. But now everything seemed different. He shrank back in wonder, for coming out of the mountains, out of the very earth itself, out of the skies, and up out of the waters of the river that flowed by the door, a great stream was coming. A stream of living creatures. Stately stags and meek-eyed does, surrounded by their young, broke through the forest in silent majesty. Great lumbering bears also came. Not one, but many. The air was filled with the humming, droning of the wings of birds, and even the steely light was shadowed by the multitude of their wings. From the forest came the wolves and foxes, and in the little pool by the cabin door fishes of many colors gathered, swimming to and fro, so many that the water seemed one living mass. Then it seemed that the great heads of the pine trees were bowed, their branches bent low, and from the mountain tops a great cloud of leaves and fine pine needles descended like a rain upon the cabin. All nature was united in a strange, sad song. Even the very earth itself seemed joined in a sobbing melody. In awe and fear, the youth crept to the cabin door and gazed within. There, on his pallet of straw, lay the old man of the mountains, his hands folded upon his breasts, his white beard spread upon his cowl, and his eyes closed. Without entering in, the youth knew the tragedy. The hermit was dead. At the foot of the rough wooden pallet stood the great arched antlered stag, his head down so that his soft nose rested on the edge of the couch. In the hollow of the old man's arms sat a little gray squirrel trying to force a hazelnut between the cold white lips. Little birds were shrilly crying as they circled around his head, and the great wolf lay like a watchdog before the body of the one he loved. The soft scent of the forest came in through the door, which stood ajar, for in the little old log cabin the door was never closed. Little baby birds in their nests cried for the hand which could feed them no more. A thin stream of tears poured over the youth's face as he gazed upon the scene. Nature knew it had lost its truest friend. In all the world that taunted, one alone had loved them. In a world that slew and hated and thoughtlessly robbed them of their right to live, they had found one who understood. And now the cold fingers of eternal night had closed his eyes, and the chilly voice of the mountain peaks had whispered in his ear. Who could they go to now when their friend was dead? Soon again the rude hand of the huntsman would have no sweet voice to offset it. The beasts knew this and were sad. The youth stood for several seconds, unable to take his eyes from the scene. A great something welled up in his soul, and he remembered the promise he had made, his promise to be true to the furred and feathered friends. He passed slowly through the cabin door. The great wolf looked at him but did not move. Just a low howl like a groan of despair broke from the beast's throat. As he touched the still cold form of the hermit, the little squirrel raised his eyes, beady bright eyes like sparks of fire, and two tiny paws reached out to cover the face of the master he had loved. The youth stroked the little beast's shiny body as it laid stretched out across the form of the hermit, and biting his lip to hold in cheek the pain of his soul, the hunter of the days gone by stepped again to the door of the cabin and gazed out. He started back from sheer amazement. Such a sight as met his vision had never before confronted man, nor probably ever will again. As far as the eyes could reach in every direction, the mountains and valleys were alive. Each tree branch bore its weight of feathery life. In each glade and opening stood some stately beast. Not hundreds nor thousands, but it seemed all nature was gathered there. The mighty gray clouds over the mountains rumbled and moaned, and lurid flashes of lightning rent their hazy depths. The gentle rain was pouring down, pattering among the leaves, and the youth, looking at the form on the couch, murmured, Indeed, blessed are the dead that the rain raineth upon. The voice within him spoke, saying, When has such homage been done to living man? Has emperor or king had such a cortege as this? Many great ladies and grand men march in the funerals of the great. Many there are who come and pay respects to a nation's dead. And ofttimes they do not know and do not care, but each one who stands in this great cortege is true to the soul of its being. No sham is here, no pretense. Each one of these beasts to its very soul adores the thing it pays its homage to. Each of these little furred and feathered things would gladly die for that one. Each tree and stone would give of its fleeting life the fullest and the utmost. When man has a friend among the beasts and birds, that man is good, for there is no guile in their lives, no subtleness in their adoration. The youth was overcome, and sinking upon his knees gazed out at that endless stream of faces. Great sorrowing eyes that could not speak, but with lowered heads and drooping bodies whispered the emotions of their souls. The great strong trees, even the blades of grass, bent their heads, for the one who loved them all had gone away. This is my task, murmured the youth, and I will fill it. What greater proof has man of the depth of his sincerity than that a ring of faces as these should pay devotion to him? I am not going back into the valley again. I am going to stay here and serve these beasts and birds as the old man did. The shades of night fell over the mountain, but they were light that night with 1,000,000 fires. 1,000,000 flaming altars set up their sacrifices, and through the night gleaming coals of fire, the eyes of the silent watchers, row after row, stretched out into an infinity. The next morning, when the sun rose, there was a new hermit living in the mountains. Under a cross of rocks, the body of the aged man was laid to rest, while his spirit interceded before a greater throne for the beasts that he had loved. The great cowl was worn by another, the staff strengthened another's hand. So through the years that went rapidly by, in his love for nature, the one who had once slain nursed the wounds that he had made. The birds and beasts learned to know him also, and soon they gathered round his door to whisper their secrets in his ear and tell their love stories to his soul. And some there were who slowly learned to forget the other one and to love him anew, and the one he had awakened. Down in the village, no man knew what had happened. They did not know that the hermit of the pines was dead, for still his gray-cowled figure wandered among the hills. They used to say, "How is it that a man should be willing to live with beasts?" The old hermit had known the secret, and the younger one was fast learning it. And so, the legend says that to this day in the heart of those hills there lives an insane old man, broken by some earthly sorrow, who had given up the benefits of earthly affection to live in the mountains like a beast. They laugh about him in the village, and they lay wagers as to who shall find his bones. But in the same voice they tell you of that wonderful day years ago when the mountains grew dark and the beasts flocked together, and the great miracle took place in the hills. That story will never die in the little city at the base of the mountains. In awe they tell you of the thunder and of the majesty of the lightning. The superstitious cross themselves and say that the Spirit of God himself walked the hills that day. They never knew, nor will they ever know, that this was nature's homage, nature's only way of showing its reverence and its love for the old hermit in the gray cowl, who lived in the little cabin where the valley meets the hills. Human interest stories. Little church among the flowers. In the years gone by, the sturdy Christians of a little town banded themselves together, giving of their labor and the fruits of their toil to the building of a temple wherein to worship God. Just a little wooden church with a quaint old-fashioned steeple that ended in a cross of wrought iron. Its walls were whitewashed, its floors were bare, and its altarpiece rough-hewn. In the years that came after, the plain windows of the little old building were supplanted by glorious stained-glass pictures of angels and saints. Originally, the church was surrounded by the quaint little homes of the villagers, but as the years went by, these homes gave place to stores and buildings, until at last a great city grew up around the village church. But through the change, it remained a quaint little edifice, though towering skyscrapers and the bustle and confusion of a large metropolis grew noisy about. And so today it stands in the midst of a garden of flowers, among whose waving heads rises the old tombstones of the village churchyard, overgrown with ivy, broken down by age, and mutilated by wind and weather. Trailing creepers had been planted around the church, and now its walls were a mass of green leaves, and when the season is right, a splash of colored flowers. Red, white, and delicate shades of lavender shine out here and there. The sweet odor of the garden blooms were carried by the wind into the heart of the great city, so it seemed that this little church was an oasis of beauty in the midst of a desert of sordid things. Around it streetcars roared, and there echoed about it the boom of the overhead railway. The newsboys howled their wares, and the bootblacks, their little boxes in their hands, sat along its ancient wall. From the great church of the small town, this old building had become a delicate memory in the great town. Many other churches were there, massive and glorious, throwing their arches and spires to the very skies. But somehow this little building still remained the most hallowed spot in that great city. From between its ancient portal, brides and grooms rode away, and into its low doorway passed the caskets when the greatest of that city were laid to rest. Every Sunday morning, snatches of sacred songs were wafted out of the open window, or the old bell that called to prayer in 1850 could be heard sending out its peals as in the years gone by. It was known far and wide as the little church among the flowers, quaint and simple, carrying with it the breath of sweet lavender and those delicate old-world memories that are slowly dying out as the generations go by. Little old ladies, still living in the days of bustle and bonnet, came in each Sunday morning holding their tiny black parasols in hands, partly shielded by those fingerless lace mitts that grandmother used to wear. The old couples came trotting in, the Romeos and Juliets of '63, and they remembered the day when their fathers had swung their axes to hew the logs, and their mothers' nimble fingers had twisted the yarns on the spinning wheel to weave the first curtain that hung in the little village church. They remembered the first minister of that church, the dear old doctor who now lay in the churchyard, with morning glory vines twining over his gravestone. And everyone remembered and loved that dear old man whose pulpit still hung in the anteroom of the church, whose tireless fingers themselves had driven the nails that built the pews now blackened with age, and whose tired, careworn yet sweet face had so many times gazed out upon the flock who had gathered in the years gone by. Father Jackson was dead. His successor had also been laid away, and now from a distant place had come a new minister to occupy the pulpit of the little church among the flowers. The first Sunday he came to them, the congregation was pleased. Both of those who had gone before him were simple men of simple ways, whose kindly message of brotherhood and love had helped to mold the lives of simple faiths, and the new minister bid fair to follow in their footsteps. The only difference was that he was very young. As he stood before them, they wondered at his boyish face. But then they wondered at several other things also. As he stood on the simple pulpit in his quiet black suit, one old lady whispered to her friend, as she touched her eyes with a little black-bordered handkerchief, "The dear minister has suffered much. He looks like my son who has been gone for so many years." Everyone realized and agreed that this minister was a very strange man, a stranger one than had ever gone before. But as Sunday after Sunday rolled by, and his clear, simple message found its way into their hearts, they hung his picture with the other two in the old hallway, for in his spirit they seemed to feel the sturdy pioneers of faith who had led them before. Let us try and build for you a picture of this new minister as he stands in the pulpit, the many-colored lights of the stained-glass windows playing upon his slender, intellectual face. Father Huntley was still in his early 20s, and his fine face was unmarked by line or blemish. His brow, high and noble, met wavy locks of dark brown hair. His form was very slender, almost that of a wraith, and long, slender fingers turned the pages of the ancient Bible, marked and remarked with old-fashioned writing of the earnest souls of long ago. This young minister had great dark eyes that seemed to gaze right through everyone they looked upon, but nevertheless soft eyes seemed ready to weep all the time. His mouth, finely chiseled, had a slight droop at the corners which gave an air of sadness to his face. His voice, soft and musical, seemed ever filled with pathos, and he looked like one who, though young in years, had suffered deeply and known truly. When Father Huntley told of the simple life of the Master and his apostles, there was scarce a dry eye in the church. And then when he spoke of the finer sentiments of life, of love and friendship, of diligence and duty, a thrill went over his congregation. As the Sundays went by, the congregation grew larger and larger, until each morning dozens who could not enter gathered in the courtyard of the church to listen to the voice which spoke with such strange eloquence and such sincere understanding of life's ever-changing sea. 3 years passed, and the minister had won his way into the hearts of each one of the simple folks who came there to the same pew where their fathers and grandparents had come for the last 75 years. His life was above reproach, and in the daily performance of his ministerial tasks he exhibited a spirit almost divine. Be it night or day, when he was called, he was ever ready, always patient, ever kind. He fulfilled the little labors for his flock and sought to lead them in the path of godliness. When the month of June came around, it brought, as it always did, orange blossoms and bridal wreaths, and the greatest and noblest of that city came down to the little church among the flowers, to be united in life's mysteries by the slender band of gold. but more than that, to receive the blessing of Father Huntley, who seemed to understand and know these emotions that so swayed their souls. One beautiful morning, many rows of carriages and automobiles drew up before the little church among the flowers. Two of the city's finest families were to be united through the marriage of their children. The little church was gloriously decorated with arches of orange blossoms and lilies. The choir was singing, and the pews were filled with the richest and noblest of the day. The bride, a little society butterfly, was demurely hanging upon the arm of her father, while the groom, an army captain with clanking sword and dress uniform, was surrounded by a number of his brother officers. It was a festive day. Two little flower girls were strewing the aisle of the church with roses, and the old-fashioned organ that had so many times pealed out its notes filled the air with the soft notes of the wedding march. At the altar stood the minister, in his hands the open Bible, its pages turned to the marriage service. In his eyes was the same sad look that so often filled them, and his white hands were as pieces of marble against the pages before him. Down the aisle the solemn procession wound its way, youth and age together, celebrating one of life's most solemn mysteries. Before the altar they stopped. Then, in his clear, musical voice, the minister read the marriage service. There was a deep pathos in his tones as he slowly pronounced the words of the sacred ritual, and when he asked if there were any who knew why these two should not be united in the holy bond of matrimony, it seemed that his voice caught. Then he went on. Placing their hands together, he raised one of his own to heaven, pronouncing in clear, distinct tones that thrilled through the whole church, "In the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, I pronounce you man and wife." There was a hush for a moment. A weight seemed in the air, and then the organ broke the heavy silence. In a few seconds, the scene again became one of life and ambition. Congratulations, a few previously prepared sobs from the bride, perfectly timed and romantically performed, showered of rice and old shoes, the honking of automobile horns, cries of congratulations. And a few seconds later the church was empty of its throng, and all that remained was the slender, sad-eyed minister, his face illuminated by a golden light which shone down through a yellow pane in the window. A heavy cloud, holding winter rain, hung over the city in whose heart stood the little Church of the Flowers. The gray light coming through the window panes sent weird shadows among the pews and rafted ceiling of the ancient building. The pigeons that nested in the bell tower were circling around the ancient belfry, uttering plaintive cries at the approaching storm. At first it seemed that the church was deserted, but looking more closely there could be seen a figure sitting alone in the front pew, his hands clasped in prayer and his eyes raised to the great gilded cross that hung over the altar. No word sounded from the lips of the praying man, but from his heart poured out a great stream of feeling which seemed to circle round and round the ancient crucifix, carved from rock wood and gilded by the now still hand of Father Jackson. It was the young minister who sat there, dimly outlined in the pale and uncertain light. He sat as he had many times before, seeking solace for an unknown emptiness in the cross he so devoutly served. As he prayed, there came the sound of a swinging door. A gray shaft of light appeared, and framed against it stood the figure of a well-built and erect man who passed slowly down the aisle of the church and sank into one of the pews near the minister. Then the visitor saw Father Huntley for the first time. He sat for some minutes studying the face of the minister. Then, as the prayers seemed ended, he crossed over and touched the minister lightly on the shoulder. "Reverend sir," he asked, "do you not remember me?" The minister looked up for a second as if undecided. Then a smile spread over his face, and he extended his hand. "Yes, I remember you well. You were Captain Hendricks, whom I married in this little church last year." You have a good memory, answered the other, accepting the hand and clasping it warmly. Yes. In a faraway voice, as though speaking with the words of memory. I remember it well, one of the most beautiful weddings that was ever held in the little church of the flowers. Surely, brother, the blessing of God was upon you that day. The other man's head drooped, and to the amazement of the minister, he sank on his knees in the aisle. Father Huntley knew that this visitor was crying, and his long, slender hand rested softly on the captain's shoulder as he exerted a slight pressure of sympathy. Have things not gone well with you? He asked. No, answered the other, as with tremendous effort he shook off the passing weakness and rose to face the minister. No, things have not gone well. You remember the little laughing-eyed girl whom I led to the altar? Yes, answered the minister softly, the sad look creeping into his eyes. I remember her. Has she not been true? The young captain shook his head. Alas, no. I idolized her, built her into the shrine of my soul, but to her I have always been a plaything. A few days ago she left me, leaving nothing behind but this little note and a broken heart. In my sorrow there seemed to come back to my mind that strange expression on your face the day you married us. And I have come to ask you, friend, both advice and comfort, for I have need of them. Something tells me you too have suffered deeply, and maybe you can give me the strength to go on after the idol of my heart has deserted me. The minister placed his hand gently on the captain's shoulder and pointed up to the cross over the altar. In life, brother, he spoke sincerely, each must take his cross. I have had mine. You now have yours. In the hours of silence, I am indeed alone, for it seemed I was born with a broken heart. Through years of lonely youth I wandered. There were none who knew and none who understood, so, alone and heavy-hearted, I renounced the world and all that is in it, or rather, shall I say, I gave up that which I had never had and renounced an unreality I had never known. I imagined that the great master must have felt as I did, so I sought to forget myself by serving others. Coming to this little church soon after graduating from theological seminary, I found one here who seemed to know and seemed to understand, and spark, which had long been dead, in fact had never been lighted, burst into flame within my heart, even as it must have done in yours. I kept an idol in my dreams for many years during my service here as the minister of this church. I wound that idol into my prayers. I saw in it the glory of a Madonna, and the face of saint and martyr seemed not so good as that of the idol in my heart. But mine was broken even as yours had been, so I can comfort and console you in your sorrow by saying there is a sweetness in it all. In losing the world of men, one finds the world of God. I live no more in the bustle and confusion of life, and God willing, I will stay here in the church of the flowers until some day I am laid to rest with those who have gone before, among the morning glory vines and the honeysuckle in the little churchyard behind. As the minister spoke, a strange light was shining in his face. I have read of the monks in their meditation, how in the prayer and silence great visions came to them, and they painted in crude colors upon the walls of their cells. I have heard how year after year, with colored inks and ancient parchments, they wrote and illuminated works of glory to their God and King. As I walk in the gloom of this old church, I seem to feel a cowl fall about my shoulders, and it seems that somewhere in the distant past, in the brown robe of the mendicant, I wandered amid the arches and pillars of some ancient monastery. I wandered into this world with the body of a man and the heart of a monk. I sought to leave these gray walls, not of stone but of the soul, and be like other living things in the world without. I saw one who seemed a dream of the ages, a face that might have haunted me had I drawn paintings upon dungeon walls, or matched fine blocks of marble into mosaics as did those of old. When the world has been false to you, brother, come here to me. I came into this world for a great lesson, and I have learned it. I can aid you in learning yours also. What lesson came you to learn, Reverend Sir? Asked the soldier respectfully. I came to learn to love as God loves, answered the minister, looking up once again at the massive crucifix. I learned to love and give that which I love the most. You think you love, sir, and you weep for that which has left you. I loved, but I would have left if the one I had loved had stayed. My romance was short-lived, a few short words, a merry laugh, but it left in my soul a mark which ages of loneliness had made hungry for such a token. I dreamed of that day. I lived for that day. And on Sunday mornings, as I spoke the soft words of the Master to my flock, I spoke it to one more than all the rest, the one who seemed to understand. Your romance, sir, has ended, even as mine has ended. It seems I had waited 100,000 years for that day, but to have it slip away, like all things earthly, and leave me alone again with my God. I'm not so alone with him now, for I see and understand better. But when that momentous day was over, when my dream was shattered, I fell at the foot of yonder altar, and would gladly have died there, for there seemed nothing left in my life worthwhile. 3 whole nights I lay in prayer at the foot of the altar, praying for death, for anything to take away the utter loneliness in my life. But I had to live. A voice was endlessly whispering, "Go on, go on." The minister's hands were on the shoulders of the captain, and his eyes were gazing into those of the soldiers, who felt in his soul the agony of the other. You lost your dream after it was realized. I lost mine before. Who shall say which is better? I learned to love and to give up the thing I loved, and if you love her well enough, you will send her on her way in peace, realizing that your greatest love, if it be true, rests in her happiness. Father, how can you say that? Exclaimed the captain. How can you say that if I love her best, I will let her go? Do you not realize I live for her alone? The minister nodded his head. I do, he answered. That is what I say. Alas, father, you have had but little of this world's romance, answered the captain. But you could not love as I have loved, and then stand by while another steals the idol of your dream. I have done that and more, answered the minister. I have stood by and aided in the giving. The laughing, blue-eyed girl to whom I married to you last year was the one who had been the idol of my dream. She found happiness in you, and I found happiness in her gladness. He turned quickly and walked silently away. At the door that led to the little rectory, he turned and held out his hand in benediction to the captain. Goodbye, brother, he said, smiling softly. You will go back to your world again, but I shall stay here. When you are sad, come to me, for you will always find one who understands here in the little church among the flowers. Special articles. Occult qualities of herbs. The following article is the introduction of Nicholas Culpeper's Complete Herbal, a rare book written in 1653 and published in London in 1837. It is copied here exactly as it was printed then, with all the peculiarities of punctuation and sentence formation, although this may sometimes lead to confusion and some difficulty of grasping the meaning. The old-fashioned style of it is so odd and delightfully quaint, it would seem like marring to change a bit of it. Even though the manner of expression of 1653 is not so smoothly flowing and eloquent as in our days, of a more polished tongue, still it should enhance rather than detract from the wonderfully deep and beautifully simple truths, written with such great pains and infinite care. But first, here is a short paragraph or two about the author's life and manner of living, taken from the preface of the book. Nicholas Culpeper, the writer of this work, was son of Nicholas Culpeper, a clergyman, and grandson of Sir Thomas Culpeper, Bart. He was sometime a student in the University of Cambridge, and soon after was bound apprentice to an apothecary. He employed all his leisure hours in the study of physic and astrology, which he afterwards professed and set up business in Spitalfields next door to the Red Lion, formerly known as the halfway house between Islington and Stepney, where he had considerable practice and was much resorted to for his advice, which he gave to the poor gratis. Astrological doctors have always been highly respected, and those celebrated physicians of the early times whom our author seems to have particularly studied, Hippocrates, Galen, and Avicen, regarded those as homicides who were ignorant of astrology. Paracelsus indeed went farther. He declared a physician should be predestined to the cure of his patient, and the horoscope should be inspected, the plants gathered at the critical moment, etc. Culpeper was a writer and translator of several works, the most celebrated of which is his herbal, being an astrologo-physical discourse of the common herbs of the nation, containing a complete method or practice of physic, whereby a man may preserve his body in health or cure himself when sick, with such things only as grow in England, they being most fit for English constitutions. This celebrated and useful physician died at his house in Spitalfields in the year 1654. This book will remain as a lasting monument of his skill and industry. Culpeper's original epistle to the reader. All other authors that have written of the nature of herbs give not a bit of reason why such an herb was appropriated to such a part of the body, nor why it cured such a disease. Truly, my own body being sickly brought me easily into a capacity to know that health was the greatest of all earthly blessings. And truly, he was never sick that doth not believe it. Then I considered that all medicines were compounded of herbs, roots, and flowers, and seeds, etc., and this first set me to work in studying the nature of simples, most of which I knew by sight before. And indeed all the authors I could read gave me but little satisfaction in this particular, or none at all. I cannot build my faith upon authors' words, nor believe a thing because they say it, and could wish everybody were of my mind in this, to labor to be able to give a reason for everything they say or do. They say reason makes a man differ from a beast. If that be true, pray what are they that, instead of reason for their judgment, quote old authors? Perhaps their authors knew a reason for what they wrote, perhaps they did not. What is that to us? Do we know it? Truly, in writing this work, first, to satisfy myself, I drew out all the virtues of the vulgar or common herbs, plants, and trees, etc., out of the best or most approved authors I had or could get. And having done so, I set myself to study the reason of them. I knew well enough the whole world and everything in it was formed of a composition of contrary elements, and in such a harmony as must needs show the wisdom and power of a great God. I knew as well this creation, though thus composed of contraries, was one united body, and man an epitome of it. I knew these various affections in man, in respect of sickness and in health, were caused naturally, though God may have other ends best known to himself, by the various operations of the microcosm. And I could not be ignorant that as the cause is so much the cure be, and therefore that he would know the reason of the operation of the herbs must look up as high as the stars astrologically. I always found the disease vary according to the various motions of the stars. And this is enough, one would think, to teach a man by the effect where the cause lies. Then to find out the reason of the operation of herbs, plants, etc. by the stars went I, and herein I could find but few authors, but those as full of nonsense and contradiction as an egg is full of meat. This not being pleasing and less profitable to me, I consulted with my two brothers, Dr. Reason and Dr. Experience, and took a voyage to visit my mother nature, by whose advice, together with the help of Dr. Diligence, I at last obtained my desire, and being warned by Mr. Honesty, a stranger in our days, to publish it to the world, I have done it. But you will say, what need I have written on this subject, seeing so many famous and learned men have written so much of it in the English tongue, much more than I have done? To this answer neither Gerard nor Parkinson, or any that ever wrote in the like nature, ever gave one wise reason for what they wrote, and so did nothing else but train up young novices in physic in the school of tradition, and teach them just as a parrot is taught to speak. An author says so, therefore it is true. And if all that authors say be true, why do they contradict one another? But in mine, if you view it with the eye of reason, you shall see a reason for everything that is written, whereby you may find the very ground and foundation of physic. You may know what you do, and wherefore you do it. And this shall call me Father, it being that I know of never done in the world before. I have now but two things to write, and then I have done. 1, what the profit and benefit of this work is, and 2, instructions in the use of it. 1, the profit and benefits arising from it, or that may occur to a wise man from it, are many. So many that should I sum all up the particulars, my epistle would be as big as my book. I shall quote some few general heads. First, the admirable harmony of creation is herein seen, in the influence of stars upon herbs and the body of man, how one part of the creation is subservient to another, and all for the use of man, whereby the infinite power and wisdom of God in the creation appear. And if I do not admire at the simplicity of the ranters, never trust me. Who but viewing the creation can hold such a sottish opinion? So that it was from eternity, when the mystery of it are so clear to every eye. But that Scripture shall be verified to them. Rom. I 20. The invisible things of him come from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, and a poet could teach them a better lesson. Because out of thy thoughts God shall not pass, his image stamped is on every grass. This indeed is true. God has stamped his image on every creature, and therefore the abuse of the creature is a great sin. But how much the more do the wisdom and excellency of God appear if we consider the harmony of the creation and the virtue and operation of every herb. Secondly, hereby you may now know what infinite knowledge Adam had in his innocence, that by looking upon a creature he was able to give it a name according to its nature. And by knowing that, thou mayest know how great thy fall was. And he humbled for it, even in this respect, because hereby thou art so ignorant. Thirdly, here is the right way for thee to begin at the study of physic. If thou art minded to begin at the right end, for here thou hast the reason of the whole art. I wrote before in certain astrological lectures, which I read and printed, entitled Astrological Judgment of Diseases, what planet caused as a second cause every disease, how it might be found out what planet caused it. Here thou hast what planet cures it by sympathy and antipathy. And this brings me to my last promise, viz., instructions for the right use of the book. And herein let me premise a word or two. The herbs, plants, etc. are now in the book appropriated to their proper planets. Therefore, first consider what planet causeth the disease, that thou mayest find it in my aforesaid judgment of diseases. Second, consider what part of the body is afflicted by the disease, and whether it lies in the flesh or blood or ventricles or bones. Thirdly, consider by what planet the afflicted part of the body is governed, that my judgment of diseases will inform you also. Fourthly, you may oppose diseases by herbs of the planet, opposite to the planet that causes them, as diseases of Jupiter by herbs of Mercury, and the contrary, diseases of the luminaries by the herbs of Saturn, and the contrary, diseases of Mars by herbs of Venus, and the contrary. Fifthly, there is a way to cure diseases sometimes by sympathy, and so every planet cures his own disease. As the sun and moon by their herbs cure the eyes, Saturn the spleen, Jupiter the liver, Mars the gall, and diseases of choler, and Venus diseases in the instruments of generation. Nick Culpepper. From my house in Spitalfields, next door to the Red Lion, September 5th, 1653.
Who's gonna kill this sacred cow? You were never political anyhow. Since when did you start trusting in the government? Since when was it okay to ridicule and shame your neighbor? Your opinions have become as fickle as artificial flavors. What matters most to you? What the TV host told you to do? Or a moral compass that points true north, oh true? Who's gonna kill this sacred cow? You were never religious anyhow. Since when did you kiss the ring on the hand of the Pope? Since when do we need pharmaceuticals to cope? Your soul has become, ever-loving soul has become, as brittle as communion wafers. What matters most to you? What the Holy Ghost told you to do? Or a moral compass that points true north, oh true? I'm gonna kill this sacred cow. Bureaucrats think I'm non-essential anyhow. Since when has our culture become so lowbrow? It's all touchscreens, and nobody has any know-how. Your idea of fun is taking 1,001 photos of your duck face. Matters most to you what the celebrities post told you was cool, or a moral compass that points true north, oh true. I'm gonna kill this sacred cow. I'm gonna kill your 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 sacred cow.